Katherine has a really unique background. I don't know if you know of Katherine or have heard of Katherine or know her personally. She recently retired from the Finley Hancock Foundation, and tremendous growth for the foundation under her leadership tenure. She was also recognized by AFP, Association of Fundraising Professionals, during National Philanthropy for her contributions in the area of fundraising and philanthropy. And I know that she's done a tremendous amount of work with local boards. And I'm particularly appreciative that she's aware of some of the idiosyncrasies unique to Northwest Ohio. So I think all of that's a great positioning. And I know I really don't want to waste your time because I want to get her right into her presentation. She's got tons to share. So you're more than welcome to check out her background. She'll mention her website along the way probably, and also on LinkedIn. So Katherine, welcome to the center.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many people here today. I can't actually see you, but I see that we have 13 participants, and I'm really grateful for that. What I'm going to talk with you about today is how you can help your board and your board members become more engaged in their board service. And then as a result of that, become better ambassadors for your organization. So the first part of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about some ideas about why boards can be disengaged, look at what some of the norms are, and then offer at the end of the presentation some practical tips to improve your engagement with your board. I think in smaller shops, there's often, it's often a challenge because not only are you looking to your boards for their governance expertise and their fulfillment of their legal duties as board members, you're also relying on them as volunteers. And that's where you can start to see some missed expectations and confusion about what the board member's role is. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, I want to let everyone know that if you feel your board is not actively engaged, you are not alone. In 2019, an organization by the name of Boardable conducted a survey, pretty broad survey of organizations, and found that 60% of organizations have no interaction or communication with their boards or among board members between meetings. Less than 60% had better than 70% attendance. So that means that most organizations, when their boards meet, they're not getting 100% or even 80% attendance to their meetings. Only 15% reported that board members assist them with introductions to prospective donors or other persons of influence. And only 18% of boards or organizations track indicators, KPIs, and give feedback to their boards about their engagement, the participation, and their fundraising. And I think something that we've all experienced is that about half of the organizations reported that the director or only one or two board members dominated most of those board meeting discussions. Now, on the upside, though, board members are willing to share their board membership and their experiences on social media and at networking and social events. So there is a willingness to get engaged, but perhaps there's not as strong follow through as we'd like to see. So why do we care? Boards are absolutely an integral part of our organizations, and they represent an inner circle of folks who know about your organization, who care about your mission, and to not have them fully engaged in promoting and supporting your organization is a tremendous lost opportunity. There's a lot of wasted time. I know I've had the experience of going to board meetings as a board member and sitting there and having that feeling of deja vu. Didn't we talk about this last month? Didn't we talk about this last quarter? And this sense of wasting time, either catching people up or rehashing the same issues over and over again, which leads to a lack of productivity. Boards are expensive. We're required to have a board, but if you take a look at what it is required of your organization to sustain and support a board, there's a lot tied up in board minutes, board meetings, communication with board members, recruitment of board members, and it's very costly to have that type of input and get very little output in terms of productivity. And the bottom line is in most organizations, especially smaller organizations, staff just can't do it all alone. You don't have the luxury of a dedicated fundraising position, probably. You don't have a CFO. You don't have a public relations team. And you're really counting on your board to come in and help you fill some of those very important roles. So let me ask you this. Does this sound familiar to you? When you get into a board meeting or you're having interactions with board members, do you sense that in the room there's a fear of criticism, that no one wants to say make a candid remark? Is there an avoidance of risk? Are you frustrated in that perhaps your board is avoiding taking risks in either in programming, in financial, or even in their relationships and reaching out and creating new relationships? Do you find that you or other board members might be making negative assumptions about people and their motivations? Rather than thinking the best about people and their motivations, are you trying to figure out, why is that person doing that? Do you find in your meetings that you're not tapping into skills and experiences of board members, that you know that the people sitting around the table have those skills and experiences that could be so helpful, but for whatever reason, they're not stepping forward or you're not able to engage them? And again, do you find that your meetings are dominated by one or two voices? And I think the final bullet point is that sort of that gut check. When you look at your board, do you have chronic low attendance? Do you dread meetings? Do you feel that you want to avoid engaging with your board members outside of board meetings or perhaps even during board meetings? These are all very typical situations, and they're symptoms of an underlying issue that is lack of interpersonal trust. And it's something that is just so critical for your board to come together and function as a cohesive team. So I want to talk about that for a minute. I think that we tend to think of boards as this entity that's sort of outside the organization, but connected to the organization. And as leaders, we put a lot of time and effort into our staff development and making sure that we as a staff are functioning as a team. But have you stopped and thought about your board as a team? When you think about the processes that go into creating a board, you're throwing together a group of people who may or may not know each other, and you're expecting them to behave in ways that may take more time or more effort than you realize to accomplish. Pat Lencioni has written actually several really great books on high-performing teams. And his most well-known book is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And in that, he presents a model that has at the bottom of it where the problems start, and that's absence of interpersonal trust. When people don't trust each other, then there's fear of conflict. And by conflict, we don't mean knock it down, drag out fights in the boardroom, but we do mean fear of asking questions, fear of saying, oh, I don't see it that way, fear of saying, oh, there might be a different way, or I disagree with that, and here's why. So when you have fear of conflict, then that develops a lack of commitment. When people are able to sit back, they don't want to engage in what's going on, and therefore their commitment is never engaged. When you have a lack of commitment in his model, then you have avoidance of accountability. If I never said I was on board with adding a program or doing a fundraiser, then I'm not accountable for the results. And that can be very powerful dynamic going on in your boardroom. And again, when you have no accountability, then there's no attention to the results. If no one's responsible, then okay, maybe it didn't go as well as we thought, but okay, we all had a nice time. And that's something that as smaller organizations, you just really can't afford that kind of situation to develop. So what I want to talk a little bit about is how can we, from the very beginning, engage our boards in ways that create and build that interpersonal trust and create kind of the nirvana of boards, which would be a board meeting where people are actively asking questions. They're appreciating and tapping into the board's expertise and also the staff expertise, and there's respect for that expertise. The time at your meetings are focused on issues, not board member or staff behavior. I have had situations where in a board meeting, board members have exhibited behavior that I would find unacceptable in other situations. People becoming argumentative, people unable to move on from a particular issue or point. It can be very damaging, and it can take a lot of time, both during the board meeting, after the board meeting, and behind the scenes, trying to manage or understand what is going on with that particular individual. When you have that great board meeting, you walk out of it and you say, we had really constructive debate, there was give and take, and there was a commitment to finding the best alternative, the best outcome, not the one that by sitting back we can all live with, but really a commitment to working forward to find the best outcome. And then with that, is there a willingness to commit to priorities? Is there a willingness to say, this year we're going to accomplish X, Y, and Z, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable to those priorities? And then ultimately, are you able to reflect back and say, our board delivered, our organization was able to focus on and attain real results for the people that we serve? So at this point, I'm going to stop and ask, are there any questions so far? Heather?
Not at this time. Just a reminder, if you have a question anywhere along the way, just enter it in the chat box. However, I'm just wondering if perhaps there might be some people on the line who don't know what a KPI is. If you could explain that.
Sure. A KPI is a key performance indicator or a metric. So in your organization, you might have identified that you will serve X many people per day, or perhaps process this many applications per month, those sorts of key performance indicators. For your board, a performance indicator might be that we will have 90% attendance at all of our board meetings, or that 100% of our committee chairs will make a report to the board at least quarterly, those sorts of things. So there's indicators of engagement, and I'm going to talk about some of those in a minute here, but begin to identify what would you want your board to be doing, and how could you measure that? And not in a massive research sort of way, but in a very simple sort of, let's look back at our board minutes and see, did our committee chairs make reports, or did the staff make those reports? Those sorts of things. Okay, I'm going to move on then. So how do you get to board nirvana? And I think you've got to begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey said. And I think the very first step is, when you're recruiting your board members, are you creating the right expectations and the right environment to support their engagement? Often in organizations, and I've seen this in organizations that I've led, the board member recruiting is a default that goes to a particular officer or the nominating committee chair. And that's okay if that person is engaged themselves, they're enthusiastic, and they understand the mission and are ready to go out and talk to people about that. However, if they're not, or if they're not comfortable in that role, it is okay. And I would say, I would recommend that perhaps there's another board member or a member of that committee who would be a better fit for that job. And I think that's something that you need to take a look at. If your committee recruiter is reticent or uncomfortable, then right there you have a problem, because they're not approaching these prospective board members with enthusiasm. Then that takes us to the committee. One of the typical ways that organizations work is they convene their nominating committee or their governance committee when they have a vacancy. And all of a sudden, we have a problem. Joe Smith has resigned from our board, and Jill Smith is going to be terming off in another month, and we've got 2 vacancies, and oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Not a good environment for thoughtful, reflective board recruitment. I highly recommend that your nominating committee meet at least quarterly and have ongoing conversations about who's terming off, who might be leaving, what are the skills that we need, and do we have a list of folks that we can go and talk to on an ongoing basis. Second thing that I recommend, and I provided a handout for this, is using that wonderful tool, the board member matrix. So often in smaller organizations, the board members will say, oh, well, I know so-and-so, and they just retired. You hear this a lot. They just retired, and maybe they have time to serve on our board. And there's very little attention paid to what are the skills and knowledge that your board and your organization needs to move your organization forward. Is it someone with a marketing background? Is it someone with an investing background? And to just fill a seat with a warm body, that's a really missed opportunity. So that's something that I highly encourage organizations to take a look at and use at your nominating committee meetings or your governance committee meetings. What are the skills that you're missing, and who might be a good person to fill that gap? I've already spoken a little bit about what's said at the recruitment meetings. Board service is a privilege. It is a privilege. And if you're not presenting the opportunity to serve on your board as the opportunity that it is, you're really selling your organization and your board short. There is value in being a board member. There's the opportunity to learn leadership skills. There's an opportunity to build networks and your own spheres of influence as a volunteer. For some people, it's an opportunity to be recognized or to lead an important effort in your community. To approach a board recruitment lunch or Zoom session in a less than forward-looking stance is to really sell that opportunity short. Another recommendation is to have a board member job description. And when you meet with that person, do you spend some time very clearly right on the front end saying, these are the board member expectations. Having clarity around those expectations and creating the expectation of engagement is critical at this recruitment phase, because you're really setting the stage for what comes next. I have had people say to me, asking me to be on the board, saying, that's okay, you don't have to come to all the meetings. We know you're really busy. We'd just really like to have you on your board. Oh my gosh. That is a recipe for disaster, because you just gave that person permission to not engage. And if you find yourself in that mode or hearing words that sort of sound like that, it's time to stop and take a step back and think about, why are you recruiting this person, and what are your expectations, and what do you really need for your organization? And then the final thing that I want to mention, and I think this is also a critical point, is are you screening for experience in management experience? One of the most important disconnects that occurs is that, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back one. Oh, that's okay. I'll just stay here.
Katherine, before you move on, Katherine, we do have one quick question I think is relevant to the previous slide.
Sure. If I can go back, I will do that.
Okay. So Mark is asking, and I'm pretty sure since this is the small groups that are on, he's not the only one with this question. So Mark is saying, I hear EDs saying that they are the primary board recruiter. I
Mm,
am for our organization. While I like it because I know I'm getting it, who I'm getting, it's also an added responsibility. What's the best way to do this?
um, yeah, and I understand that dynamic completely. And in the way that I hear it presented is, well, no one knows the organization better than you do. So you're the one who's in the best position to really explain what it is that we need and expect. Here's the problem. And this is what I think a conversation you need to have with your board chair or your nominating committee chair. The duties and responsibilities of board members are different from the duties and responsibilities of the executive director. And it is incumbent on the board to recruit its own membership. Now, I also completely understand, and I would never say I didn't want to be involved in that conversation, and in that idea of who's coming onto the board and sort of what are we getting into here. But the actual recruiting needs to come from that board chair or a member of the board. Um, and again, I think it's a conversation that you need to have with your committee, and and yes, involvement, but not responsibility for doing that. Does that make sense? And I'm hoping
It
that
does. And I know that there are a lot of really small organizations that
yeah,
don't have nominating. So maybe
yeah.
the first role is to grow the number of people on the board to come help.
Yes, that's possible if your bylaws permit that. But I think a real heart to heart with that board chair is critical. And that, it's perfectly appropriate for the two of you, your board, yourself and your board chair, to go out and have that conversation with a prospective board member. And for both of you to get to know that person a little bit and to learn what their skills and abilities are. But when it comes to the actual, we'd like to invite you on our board, that really needs to come from the board itself.
And if I could just inject one piece of data, some of you know that we did some research about the landscape of the nonprofits in Greater Toledo, essentially, Lucas Wood and Fulton. So if we're looking at roughly 3,500 nonprofits, and legally, each nonprofit needs to have at least 3, that's 10,500 board seats. And you know that some boards are some of your boards may have 6, 8, 10, some have 20. ProMedica had 35 at one point. So it's like there's tens of thousands of board seat asks out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm just mentioning it because that last bullet you have on that screen, do you want a warm body? I usually say you breathe, some people, you breathing good will take you. But particularly the smaller organizations, they're very much working boards.
Yeah.
There may be some people on the call that don't even have a paid staff in their organization yet.
Right.
And so do you really want a seat to be taken up with someone who's really not engaged?
Absolutely. It gets you over the hump for today. Oh, we've got a board, but you will pay for that down the road in lack of engagement or lack of experience. So that's, again, that back to the top bullet point. If you don't have a nominating committee or you have a very small board or organization, this needs to be an agenda item. You need to keep this in front of your board all the time. You can't wait until that meeting before your annual meeting when you have 3 people terming off to say, okay, what are we going to do? And somebody says, well, my neighbor or my coworker, you're really selling your organization short and not giving the board the opportunity to engage and to be supportive. It becomes somewhat self-defeating, and same with the idea of a matrix. If you don't know who you're looking for, then any warm body will do, and I think that's where you start to have that disengagement, that mismatch of skills and expectations. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So what I'm going to suggest is that as I already sort of alluded to, is building a board that's engaged is an investment. It is an investment of your time. But here's the reality. We all have to have a board. We all need more help. Why not invest in this organization and have it become a positive force in your organization, driving your mission forward, versus an impediment, or at least a break on your organization's growth and development. So a couple of things that we do that I think makes a lot of sense is give board members a chance to get to know each other as more than just the faces sitting around the table. Give them an opportunity to share some personal information. When you recruit a new board member, often there's an application form, and you can ask for personal information. Tell us a little bit about your family. Do you have any pets? Where did you go to school? What are your hobbies? You find really interesting things about people, and it gives them ways and opportunities to connect and engage each other as human beings. Usually we just focus on career or professional info, and that's fine and important, but you also need to add that personal touch. I think that it makes sense to circulate that on an annual basis, and especially when a new board member comes on board. Again, it's just a paragraph or two. They can write it themselves. They can just include it on their board member application if you're already doing that, where you're collecting information, and just circulate that to your board on a regular basis so that people have a chance to get to know each other. Another very simple thing to do is use name tags. When I came to Findlay, I was the person that nobody knew. I assumed that everybody around me knew each other and that I was the person who didn't know them. You would be surprised how frequently people don't know each other and they're too embarrassed to say, I don't think we've met before, or I can't remember your name. Using name tags, giving your board members a name tag that they can wear, a permanent name tag, or just ask people to wear a name tag for the first few board meetings each year, can be really helpful for folks who are struggling to try to figure out who's who and what's what. Take time in your board meeting when you have new board members coming on to introduce them and give them a chance to talk a little bit about themselves and why they're excited to be joining your board. Don't just throw them into the mix and start your meeting as if everybody is on equal footing in terms of those relationships. Really important to give people a chance to get acquainted. And I think it's also very important to, in addition to your board time, is find an opportunity that you can dedicate for a social time for your board. You saw that statistic that the majority of boards, they don't talk to each other between board meetings. They have no communication between board meetings. So there's no opportunity to build any relationship other than that hour or two that they have in that meeting once a month or every other month. So look at your events. Do you have an annual meeting? Maybe you can invite folks to get together for dinner before or after the meeting, or a lunch. Throw a happy hour. Celebrate an organizational milestone. And it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be, as simple as, let's here in Findlay, let's all go to Ohlers and have a happy hour on the patio. And it can go a long way in building those relationships and starting to create a climate of trust where people understand each other better and are more willing to make themselves vulnerable, to ask questions, and to engage in debate, and then become engaged. I also want to stress the importance of board education. I'm hoping that everyone on this call does provide an orientation session for new board members. And if you're not, then you need to. Absolutely critical. And what the handout I provided was an outline of a board orientation process. The number one red flag for engagement is lack of knowledge about how a board works. And I know you have, because I know I have had board members say to me, I really don't understand what I'm supposed to be doing here. What is this board supposed to be doing? What is our responsibility here? And it makes your blood run cold, because if they're confused about what their role is and what their responsibilities are, then how on earth can they possibly engage? And if they do engage, you run the risk of having them engage inappropriately because they don't know what their functions, duties, and responsibilities are. An easy way to continue to provide that education is to provide your board with access to training. And if you don't, so sessions like this, other sessions I know that are available in the region, encourage your board members to participate in those. At a minimum, you can go online, and I provided some resources. There's some great websites on board development, board training, board engagement. Send them an article once a quarter. Ask your board chair to put it on as an agenda item, but you've got to put a little effort into bringing these board members along and keeping them engaged in your work as you go. Another idea that I'd like to throw out there, for a lot of organizations, there's this idea that we have to follow the set agenda, the Robert's Rules of Order agenda, old business, new business, etc. Well, what happens is if you follow that traditional agenda, the real meat of the meeting, those discussion items, those issues that are emerging, they get pushed lower and lower on the agenda until you get to the last 10 minutes of your meeting time. And here's this huge issue that needs to be discussed, but your board members are mentally and often physically checking out. So, of course, you're going to send an agenda and you're going to send your supporting docs and your written committee reports at least a week in advance. I know it sounds like that's really hard and that can be really onerous, but you've got to give your board members the opportunity to engage, to look at the material and to think about what's going to be coming up. If you don't treat it as if it's important, then they won't treat it as if it's important. I see a question popped up, Heather. Oh, Heather, you're muted.
I know, I just realized that. Sorry. Okay, yeah. So Mark says, yes, yes, yes. How a board works. This feels like a major elephant for us. So with so much information out there, not sure where to start. How do we start small?
I think that you can start small by once a quarter putting a board training item on the agenda. 10 or 15 minutes. Send an article from Board Source. Send an article from I think there's so many, and I think later on here I list some resources, but there's some really good board resources. Make it an agenda item and talk about it for 10 or 15 minutes at a board meeting, and just continuing to not make it an annual event, make it an ongoing part of your culture. Oh, we do 10 minutes of board education at our board meetings every once a quarter. It's just part of the way we do business versus we're going to have this big annual retreat and we're going to pour buckets and buckets of information on you. That's very challenging to see any change that way. I think also, as I'm discussing here, is also you can increase that engagement with how you put your agenda together. It's very important that the director gives some guidance when you send out that information in advance. You need to let them know, here's where we need action. This is what I need you to pay attention to. A lot of times in board meetings, especially those reports and that's other information, it gets talked about at the expense of the really important items that need to be lifted up, and people need to be prepared to come in and discuss. And as I say here, at a minimum, it should provide time for meaningful discussion, but not at the end of the meeting when people are starting to check out. An interesting agenda model here is called hindsight, foresight, and insight. So you have some time for hindsight, that you have your committee reports, maybe some program reports. You might put that in the form of a consent agenda where it comes out in a written form, and there's actually no discussion. It's just the sharing of information. Then you have foresight. And this is where you as the director can start to bring your board deeper into the conversation. This is you looking ahead and saying, we've got some positive trends here. Our enrollment is up, or we've got some negative trends here. Over the last 3 years, the net proceeds from our event has gone down. So you can begin to have these more meaningful conversations about the work and the environment that you're in. You can share benchmarks. For example, if you say you do special events as fundraisers, you can look at what is your net revenue from your fundraiser. Is that above or below the typical benchmarks for that type of fundraiser? Again, you're giving your board and yourself information about what you need to be paying attention to, trends that might be changing, things that change in your operating environment. I'm sure, unemployment and the pandemic, that's a huge change in your operating environment. Are there changes in health indicators in your community, if that's an area that you're responsible for? And for any organization, what are your changes or trends in your revenue sources? If you see that for example, your United Way revenue has been trending down 3 out of the last 5 years, then that's something that needs to have some conversation around it. And that's where your board can really come in and do its job. And then the final section of the agenda is called insight. This might be where you have those even more in-depth discussions about your mission, your vision, your succession planning, not only for your role, but for your board. This might be the place where you drop in that board matrix and say, okay, next year we've got X number of board members who are going to term off. What are we doing today to make sure that we replace them with people with the skills and knowledge that we need to run our organization? It's also a place for you to talk about possible strategic partnerships or changes in your clientele, but really lifting their eyes up a little bit and giving you the opportunity to provide more leadership and for them to have more engagement. We all have committees, and those committees can either be a burden or a boon to your organization. If you approach your committees and your committee structures, again, as a way to provide engagement and provide knowledge and information to your board members, it can really help you with that engagement in the long run. It's a perfect opportunity to do some teaching about your mission and your operations. It creates accountability, gives them opportunities to get to know each other. Most importantly, it puts that committee chair on the agenda. They need to have a speaking role. They need to be visible and accountable for the work that's going on. If you're making committee reports because your committee chair isn't involved, doesn't want to, etc., you've got a red flag there. You want those committee chairs to be committed and engaged in those committee responsibilities. Then we have fundraising, and this is always the ticklish point. And before I do that, I said I've got another question. You may still be muted, Heather.
I was flipping screens.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. Mark, thank you for all these questions. When you say committees, do you mean board committees or operational committees?
Or your board committees. Your board committees is what I'm speaking of.
And in a small organization, they may be one and the same.
They may be one and the same. That's exactly right.
And there may be no board subcommittees yet.
Yet. And if you don't have board committees, typically your bylaws will spell out that there is a nominating committee, a program committee, a finance committee. So those would be, the typical places where you want to have those chairs, those committee chairs engaged and responsible for not a report at every meeting, but for periodically, you need to find a way to get them into a speaking role at your board meeting. So turning to fundraising, this is the one where I think that we have the deepest disappointment from, I think sometimes, and I'll just be really candid with you. I have been in this industry for more than 30 years. And for more than 30 years, I and everyone around me has expressed disappointment in that why aren't our boards more engaged in fundraising? And I think that I've reached a point where I don't want to ask that question anymore. I want to look at what are they willing to do? What are they able to do and do well versus continuing to hamstring ourselves, waiting for behaviors that years and years of experience has shown they're just really not comfortable engaging in. So what I'd like to do is take apart a little bit what it is you're asking your board to do when it comes to fundraising. It is not just the ask, but it is, and they can have meaningful engagement and feel really good about, and you can feel really good about when a board member invites someone, maybe from their business or from their business network, to come on a tour or come to one of your programs or come see something that your organization is doing in the community. When your board member brings guests to an event, that is a huge vote of confidence in your organization. Asking them to share their board work and your organization on their social media. Right at the very top of the presentation, I pointed out that people are willing to share their board service and information about your organization on their social media. Do it. Do it. Ask them to do it. Make it easy for them. Give them the information. And ask them to put it on their Facebook, tweet it out, to put it on their Instagram, whatever it is that they use. They're willing to do it, do it. And then the other thing that's so important is forwarding names to you or your nominating committee or your board chair, the names of individuals who might have an affinity for your mission, who might be a future board member, who might be a prospective donor or supporter of your organization. All of these behaviors have value and should be respected and acknowledged when they happen. And one of the ways you can demonstrate that value, and this goes back to the question about what is a KPI, you can demonstrate that value by tabulating and reporting in the aggregate some of these numbers. So how many board members this past year invited someone to come to a tour of our facility? How many board members in the last 6 months brought someone to one of our events? How many board members have posted any information about our organization on their social media? It's very easy to tabulate and give them feedback, creating norms about this is what we'd like you to do, this is what we need you to do, and this is what we're paying attention to. And again, you don't want to embarrass people, but if you have 12 people on your board and 10 people are and 2 people aren't, then it starts to put a little pressure on those 2 people. This is a norm. Maybe I need to do this too. Now, you will have board members who are very eager and happy to go out and talk to people and assist with fundraising and love to do all that. And that's great. And they are treasures and you never want to let them go. But I think we have to face the reality of not asking people to do things that they're very uncomfortable with, but do encourage them to do those things that are also important, that they are comfortable with, that they can do, and can feel very good and confident about doing. And as they gain confidence and they gain that level of engagement, then they can sometimes become more confident and more comfortable in moving into the asking role. Back to that question about how do we do this? Create a process. Put some things on the calendar that will help you build that engagement with your board members. Are you at least annually pull out that board member job description and ask your board chair to go through it? And maybe this is where you take a look at what are the things we want to keep track of. If your board's job description says attend 80% of meetings, then that becomes a performance indicator. And you can say, well, we didn't hit that. Or, hey, we had 90% of our board attended all the meetings. That becomes a data point. Have a mixer or some other social opportunity. Circulate information, that personal information, as well as that professional information about yourself, other staff members in your board. Again, the idea of the KPIs, those key performance indicators or metrics. And we're not talking about huge program evaluation issues. I'm talking about a spreadsheet where you can just put check marks in and then total them up at the end of the year and create an aggregate report. Help the board evaluate its own performance by giving them feedback and some information. I hope you hear one of the themes here is that it is ongoing, it's not episodic, and that building that high-performing board, that engaged board, is the same as building any high-performing team. You're not going to get there overnight. It takes time to put these processes in place, to start to thaw some of those relationships and give people the opportunity to get to know each other. It takes commitment and follow through. And that's where you come in as the leader of the organization and also with your board chair. Is there commitment to build a more engaged board? Then that needs to come from the top. And my final words to you are, as you can do it, you can start small, you can do one or two things, and you will start to see a difference. So with that, I'm going to stop. I'm not sure how much time we have left, Heather. I'm assuming we're getting close to the time. Love to take any questions and hear what folks may have on their minds.
Yeah, we still have 10 minutes. And I know there are a lot of burning questions out there, you guys. So if you ask something, you're not going to be the only one. I can promise you that. One thing that I did do is I posted a link in the chat box. If you're not familiar, on our website at the center, there is a board governance and best practices checklist. And particularly with the newer organizations, when people say, I have to do everything, where do I start? My recommendation is always with board governance for all the reasons that Kathy outlined, because you can't do it yourself. You really need to enroll other people and get everybody aligned. So there's that out there. You can do a little inventory. Nobody looks at it, only you'll see it to know where you are and maybe what is outstanding. And then when you click through on this link that is in the chat box, that is a page specifically dedicated to board governance tools and resources. Some of them Kathy had mentioned. So you can scroll through, like if you've never set up committees before, then there's information out there. You'll see it all. And, one big thing is I always encourage people, do not reinvent the wheel. So if you don't have a description for a board position, okay, so you don't, but don't start it from scratch, because you just have to Google template nonprofit board job description and poof, everything under the sun pops up. But again, there's a lot under there. So we do have a comment in the chat, Aaron, saying in lieu of in-person mixers, how would you design social interactions that aren't just one more Zoom happy hour?
Oh gosh, that is the burning question, isn't it? And you know, some folks are using Facebook Live. They're holding Facebook Live events as a way to engage people. I'm going to be attending a Valentine's tea, and I received on my doorstep my teacup and a tea bag, and so this was, you know, it creates a little excitement and a little anticipation. It was something that, you know, it elevates it a little bit from just another Zoom happy hour. I've done the FaceTime videos where you can have you know, an interview, maybe interview a board member and share the link with your board members, those sorts of things. I think, you know, it's just trying to keep, especially as we're all getting a little tired of all the Zoom, but it's whatever you can think of to make it a little fresher, a little different. I think you'll see the benefits from that. And don't underestimate the fact that just showing that you care enough to put out the effort. Yeah, we're all tired of Zoom, but you're putting forward the effort to engage your board, and people will respond to that. They will appreciate that.
Yeah. That just reminds me of a Facebook group that I'm part of. So if you have a Facebook account, and you may know Joan Gary, she's a pretty high profile consultant. She started a group called Your Thriving Nonprofit, and there's 33,000 plus members in this group. Now, here's the thing. If you want to join, you need to be invited. So all you need to do is send me a request and I'll send you an invitation. But it's a great place that, so if you just threw something out there, hey, what's everybody doing to engage people that's not Zoom? I see terrific responses and guidance from different sizes of organizations all the time. So again, if you want an invitation to your Thriving Nonprofit group on Facebook, just send me a request. So let's see here. We do have some questions. Tanya says, how long should a board orientation be? When a new board member joins, I'm wondering if the orientation can take place over lunch or should it be a more formal process?
I am a fan of a more formal process because it's an important business meeting. You are sharing important information. And I think doing that in a business setting, either at your organization's office or somewhere that you can sit. Again, let's assume that we'll be no longer having to do the masking and the social distancing here soon, but where you can sit in an uninterrupted private setting, you and your board chair together with the new board member, and have a good conversation, and then maybe go to lunch afterwards.
Okay. Erin did say, thanks for the tea party idea with everyone getting a mug and supplies. I heard of another creative one. They were going to do a campfire event. And there was a little box of things that included s'mores and some other camp related things. So like, let your creativity flow. It doesn't have to be expensive, just the cost of some postage.
Yeah.
So Kathy is asking, another Kathy. Kathy indicated resources for this webinar. Where are the resources, or are there resources those just posted by you, Heather? Okay, so if someone on the call didn't get the copy of the slides yesterday and the handouts, please email me because I sent them out yesterday. Okay, so Kathy, if you don't have those, let me know and we'll get those to you. Sorry, go ahead.
In the slides, Heather, I put hot links to Boardable and to Pat Lencioni.
Great. Yep. Itzel has I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Itzel has a question. Board members are busy professionals. If less than 60% of organizations get more than 70% participation, how can we have, quote, other mixers, meetings, etc.?
Yes, we are all busy professionals. And there's no doubt about that. I think that you are looking for people who, and you need to be creating the environment that says that their board service needs to be a priority, and that they're um, that they can't just mail it in, and especially in a smaller organization. I think you need to be, when you're doing your recruitment, I think you need to be very honest and upfront and tell people, we have 8 board meetings a year. They last an hour and a half, and we expect every board member to attend at least 80% of those meetings throughout the year. And I think you just have to be bold and let them know what you need and what you expect. And you will find that people will say, oh, that's too much for me, as I've had. And then you just move on to the next person. But it's really critical to set that expectation right at the beginning, from those very first conversations.
Yeah. And if I could just build on what Kathy's saying, the more emotionally engaged and in relationship with your organization and the mission of your organization, the more likely they are going to prioritize anything that you're asking of time in their schedule. Because for all of us, time is the most coveted resource, right? And this is for when we can do in-person things again. But one of the most innovative, one, I'm a big fan of including a visit to the actual work of the organization in the orientation, so they get a feel for what you're doing. But the most innovative one I ever heard was they had a golf tournament, and the client base happened to be, I think it was autistic, or it was maybe developmentally challenged or something. Anyway, in the foursomes, in every foursome that went off, there was a client in the foursome. And so the board members all got to spend time with the people who they were serving through their mission. So be creative, think of ways to engage the board in the work, because they will make, I promise you, they will make the time in their schedule for what you are asking of them.
Universally, Heather, when I gave tours and when I worked as United Way president, when we did tours, those tours are the most meaningful, memorable aspects of the work. They're absolutely vital. Back to the how do we, people are busy, how do we keep them involved? The other advice I would give is, when you get the message from a board member, either explicitly or tacitly, that they are no longer engaged with you. And I've had board members, which I really appreciate, say, hey, my work has really picked up. I've got other priorities. I just can't do this anymore. I'd like to resign. Do not try to talk them out of it. Because again, you're setting an expectation that it's okay to just sort of skate by in terms of your board membership. Accept that with grace and appreciation and gratitude, and then go get yourself a new board member.
And I appreciate that we're at time. We have one more question if the group can hang out with us. Stacy, I did see your request. We'll make that happen. So Itzel is asking, I would love to learn more about other members, but as the president, I keep my meetings very focused and timely to respect members' time. How can I incorporate a fun get to know you better exercise during the meeting?
Oh, there's all sorts of icebreakers. I would suggest that you look for you could probably Google some meeting icebreakers. I've seen people do really fun things that don't take a lot of time, using name tags, where there's a question on the name tag, or it says, ask me about such and such. You can ask on an ongoing basis that each board member once a month do a 5 minutes of, here's who I am, here's what I do, here's my, lots of creative ways to do that. Again, make it part of your ongoing work, and you can keep it, in terms of short snippets.
Great. Katherine, thank you so much for the gift of your knowledge and your time today. Thank you all who participated. If you are not signed up for our e-news, I strongly suggest you get signed up. You can do it at the bottom of our homepage, because those of you who are subscribed know that's where we make all our major announcements. And if you participated in any of the research we did with Great Lakes Marketing to understand the needs of local nonprofits last year, we took that very seriously. We are distilling all that information and really starting to build out the services for 2021. And of course, that's where we would make the announcements in the e-news, also in the blog. So if you didn't know, we have a blog that's on our website, and you can connect to it with an RSS feed to get notifications, because you'll get that as soon as the blog post gets announced. So thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, you know where to find me at the center. And as always, it's a pleasure to serve you. Hope you have a great day.